Okay, so I see a lot of booktubers doing this, so we're gonna do our own bookshelf tour, and I have a lot of bookshelves around the house, so we're just gonna start with this one, and eventually we'll get to the rest of it. A lot of the books on here I haven't actually read because I tend to buy things that I want to read and keep them on my shelves. I really only end up keeping books that mean a lot to me that I really want to keep. People might think that's weird, but I think it was Harlan Ellison who said, "Who wants a bookshelf full of books they've already read?" Right? So, and it's nice. It's nice to look at a bookshelf and just see a random book and be like, "Oh, that looks interesting," and pick that off the shelf. So I'm just gonna talk about some of these, and I don't know. Hopefully that's interesting. I guess we'll start from the top. I have a bunch of Star Wars books up here because I meant to read a bunch of Star Wars books. I think last year. I never got around to it, but I bought a bunch in preparation. I think most of the X-wing books up here. I think I'm missing one, but I've got most of the X-wing series, the Aaron Alston and Michael A. Stackpole stuff. I've got the Shadows of the Empire book. I've got the Truce at Bakura, Courtship of Princess Leia. I know people have mixed things about that one, but I wanted to read it. I got I got a classic here, Decline and Fall by Evelyn Waugh. I haven't read this yet, but I have read this author's other work. Charlie Jacob. I guess you'd describe her as like a splatterpunk horror author. She wrote two novels that I've read that I really enjoyed. It was Haunter and This Symbiotic Fascination, and she's a really great author. I love her stuff, but this is her book of short stories, Dread and the Beast. So I look forward to reading that eventually. I have a lot of Book of the Month Club books up here. I've got more on another shelf, but there are some here. I've got The Water Dancer, The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, which I've heard a lot about. It was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. I've never read any Donna Tartt, but I have a copy of this, and I have a copy of The Secret History that I will plan to read at some point. Imaginary Friend by Stephen Chbosky, which I haven't read, obviously. But I have read Perks of Being a Wallflower. I mean, what teenage kid hasn't? The Whispers by Orlando Figes. That's about like sort of the people that were kind of left behind during the Russian Revolution. Look Homeward Angel by Thomas Wolfe. Got more Star Wars books here. This is the Jedi Academy trilogy, I think this is called. Yeah. Again, I've heard mixed things about these. I think this is the one where they had that like Death Star ripoff. I don't remember what it was called, but I don't know. We'll see how they turn out. I've got all the short story collections here. These are all dusty, sorry. But I've got, Tales from the New Republic, Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina, Tales of the Bounty Hunters, and Tales from Jabba's Palace. This one's really beat up, but I've got a lot of nonfiction up here as well. Actually, this is sort of, I don't know how, but this ended up becoming my Third Reich World War II section. I've got William Shearer's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. I've got Richard J. Evans' Third Reich trilogy. That's The Coming of the Third Reich in Power, and the Third Reich at War. And then I just bought this, which is also by Richard J. Evans, The Hitler Conspiracies, which is apparent. It's like his debunking of all these famous conspiracies. The Reichstag fire, the escape from the bunker, all that stuff. I've heard a lot of good things about Richard J. Evans. He's like a premier British historian. So
Couple of masks.
yeah, a couple of masks.
They're mine.
Yeah, these are mostly Aaron's. I don't know how would you explain these?
I was a noise musician.
Yeah, so you've got a lot of costumes and stuff. Underneath these, if I can get them off. I don't even know where. I think this is my mom's. I don't know where she got it from, but it's an old phrenology like thing. Yeah. Literary, observing, knowing faculties. All that pseudoscientific bullshit. But I don't know. I think it's kind of neat. I'm sorry. I know this is all really dusty, but I don't dust. Okay. My friend Josh gave me this. It's a replica of the crystal that Princess Mononoke wears in Princess Mononoke. He gave that to me as a present, and I just keep it up here. I have a lot of big hardback, more Book of the Month Club stuff here. Just random things, Little Women, Normal People, all that stuff. I've got a lot of big boys here, including this one, if I can get it out. Jerusalem by Alan Moore. Look at this thing. I've heard a lot of good things about it, but it's how many pages is this? 1,262 pages, so it's a big epic I've been meaning to read. Similarly, there's Ruska by Edward Rutherford, which is a big epic about like the history of Russia. Edmund White. The Disaster Artist, which I have read, and that's a really good book. I mean, I'm sure most of you have seen the movie, but the book is really good as well. Goes into a lot of detail about the making of The Room and all that stuff. I've got some hardcover Marquis de Sade here, which I haven't read yet, but I got these at half price for really cheap, and they're these really nice Grove Press hardcovers, so why not? Oh, this is a pretty interesting one. Still Dead. This is a book of short stories or edited by John Skipp and Craig Spector, and I believe there's another one of this that I don't know if I have, but this is basically a series of zombie short stories that are set in George Romero's zombie universe. And there's a story in here that I heard about that I really wanted to read. What was it? I think it was, Mort Castle, The Old Man and the Dead, which is like, it's like a Hemingway pastiche about like Hemingway fighting zombies, so that sounded cool. And then, I got, of course, Man in the High Castle. Got to show that off. I think this is a first edition. I'm not sure. Oh, no, it's a book club edition, but still, it's really nice. I haven't read it yet. Well, I've read bits and pieces of it. I like it. I like it better than the show. Sorry, but I got a couple Fred Saberhagens here. This is all part of his Lost Swords series, which I wanted to read because they're about like magic swords, and I'm all about that shit. I got some Charles L. Grant, who is a famous horror author. I've got this copy of Don Quixote here. I think this was being sold by the library, and it's annotated. It's one of those classics I've always been meaning to read and have never gotten around to, but I've heard a lot of good things about this specific translation, and I think this was free at the library, I think. Yeah, because they were giving away books that had these X's written on them. So I was like, fuck yeah, why not? I've heard a lot of good things about this translation, so. Got this, big book of pulps, pulp crime stories edited by Otto Penzler. I've got a couple of his anthologies that he's edited, I think. Some William Faulkner, Philip K. Dick, Cassandra Clare. I just wanted to see what it was like. I haven't read it yet. I know people have opinions about Cassandra Clare, but All the President's Men. I've got a couple of old pre-Lord of the Rings fantasy novels here. The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsany, and The Worm Ouroboros by E.R. Edison. I've heard especially this one's kind of a tough read because it's written in like sort of a very old English kind of style, but I don't know. I like reading things to kind of like see where the genre came from, kind of studying the old masters, I guess you'd call it. Got some more modern fantasy here. Little Big by John Crowley, which sounds cool. I believe this won a bunch of awards, and it's got like a magic house and stuff, and I love that kind of shit. And Viraconium by M. John Harrison, which I think was influenced by the Dying Earth series, and it was influenced by Gormenghast, which I read recently, so, why not? In fact, speaking of the Dying Earth, I've actually got the whole series here. Tales of the Dying Earth by Jack Vance. All 4 Dying Earth novels in one volume. I really should read this, because I've read Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe, which of course was influenced by this, so I've always been meaning to read this, but I just haven't gotten around to it. That's a really nice copy, though. Salman Rushdie, Midnight's Children. I've got a bunch of Bukowski. I've read all of this Bukowski stuff, but I've got it all scattered around the house. But yeah, Post Office, I think, was his first novel, I believe. Yeah, I think this was his first novel, and yeah, that's a great one. I mean, all of his novels are good, but I would recommend that one. And Ham on Rye, that was a good one. Okay, more classic fantasy here. The Circus of Dr. Lao, which of course was turned into the movie, Seven Faces of Dr. Lao. I love the movie, but I've never read the book, so why not? And this has illustrations in it. I didn't even know that.
I'm going to jump in as the camera guy in the back. I actually didn't know it came from a book.
Yeah, you didn't know that?
No.
Yeah, it was originally a book. I think this was published in the 30s.
I'm going to steal your spotlight a second. I love that film.
It's a great movie.
The stop motion is beautiful in it. I love it.
Is it on Blu-ray? If it's on Blu-ray, we should get it. But yeah, 1935, and I think this won a National Book Award the year it came out. But yeah, the Fred Saberhagen stuff I already mentioned, and I've got more some paperbacks here, which I'll get to in a second. But this is all a lot of big books, and also mostly nonfiction again. I've got Paul Johnson's A History of the American People, just because I've got a couple books kind of just generally on the history of America, just because I feel like, it's important to learn your own history and shit like that, which is partially also why I've got this big Civil War trilogy from Shelby Foote. I know I've done a little bit of research on it, and I know, like, he was kind of an apologist for the South and stuff, but I still want to read it because they're supposed to be classics, and, I think it's important to study this stuff. And I've got this big book on Mao by Jung Chang, which I've also heard good things about. Again, like, I need to. I feel like I have to learn this stuff. Like, it's important to study, to learn things. On the other stuff I've got down here are mostly, yeah, A Century of Stop Motion Animation, which is written by Ray Harryhausen, actually. Animator Survival Kit by Richard Williams. Cult movies. I've got this book here. Hang on. I've had this for ages. It's kind of falling apart, but it's a whole book of exploitation film posters. See, there's Jane Mansfield. Trip with the Teacher. I bought this ages ago when I was in, like, high school, I think. And, I used to stare at these for, like, hours and, like, imagine what the movies were like and shit. And this is our magazine. Me and my friend Andy, we ran this magazine together, Underbelly. It only went for 4 issues, but we published extreme horror fiction. Yeah, that should give you some idea of what it's like. So, transgressive horror, because that's the sort of stuff we're into.
There's a YouTube film now.
Yeah. Kind of continuing with the Civil War theme. This is a really famous novel of the Civil War, The Killer Angels by Michael Shara. As you can see, it won the Pulitzer Prize when it came out. Again, it's one of those things, I've heard a lot of good things about it, and I think it's important to, read about this kind of stuff and study, like, learn about your history, you know what I mean? Like, understand where you came from and who we are, that kind of shit, Some classic sci-fi, More Than Human by Theodore Sturgeon. Never read it, but I've had this copy for ages, and I like Theodore Sturgeon. He was actually one of the first sci-fi authors to write about homosexuality back in the 50s, so... I've got... I don't know if I have the third one. I don't have the third one yet, but I've got this Teddy Roosevelt series by Edmund Morris. Theodore Rex and The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt. Again, these won shitloads of awards. I think this one won the Pulitzer Prize, I believe. But, oh no, this one won the Pulitzer Prize, so... But anyway, again, like, I have a lot of books on American history. I like learning about this stuff. And then I've got, Jacqueline Carey, Santa Olivia, V.S. Naipaul, Iris Murdoch, True Grit by Charles Portis. I haven't read a lot of Western fiction. I like Western movies. I've seen tons of them. I've seen both versions of True Grit, but I've never read the novel, and it's supposed to be, like an American classic, so why not? A lot of the stuff that I own here is stuff that I bought because why not? Because it sounds interesting and I want to read it. I'm going to go through some of these. I've got these, the Moreau Quartet, which they're a series of sci-fi. These are bind-ups, but they're a series of sci-fi novels that take place in a world with, like, animal-human hybrids, and I'm all about that, so don't know if they're any good or not, but... I've got the first book in C.J. Cherry's Chauner series. I know they sell these in, like, bind-up editions, but I like having the original versions because I love the cover art. I think Michael Whelan did the cover art, but I love them. They're awesome. And yeah, C.J. Cherry is one of those sci-fi authors I've always been trying to get into. So this is one of the old DAW paperbacks with the yellow spine, so that's cool. And then I'll talk about this, I guess. Yeah, I don't know if you guys know about this. Naked Came the Stranger by Penelope Ash. So this was a hoax novel that was worked on by, I think it was 13 other people. And they basically went, they undertook this this project to basically try and write kind of the trashiest novel they could, full of, like, sex and violence and just melodramatic stuff, just to like, kind of make a point about the downfall of kind of the literary cognoscenti, I guess. How, like, people would read anything as long as it was full of enough sex and melodramatic shit. And apparently it worked. This was a big success, but then it was revealed to be a hoax, and there was this whole thing about it. And I know it's purposefully supposed to be bad, but I find that sort of stuff interesting, so I wanted to read it. Alright, so now onto the second shelf. There's really, as you've noticed, there's really no sense of organization to these. I just put books wherever they'll sit. I try to keep series together if I can, but I mean, I don't have the time to worry about alphabetizing everything and arranging it by size or color or whatever, like, And like I said, I like the idea of having a shelf just full of random stuff, and you can just look at it at any time and just see something and be like, oh, that looks interesting, and just take it off the shelf and read it. I don't know. There's something nice about that. It's like creating a treasure hunt for yourself in a way, I guess. Anyway, I've got this first book in a trilogy by Jonathan Mayberry called Ghost Road Blues. I've heard a lot of good things about it. I believe this won the Bram Stoker Award the year it came out. I'm not sure. But yeah, I've read a little bit of Jonathan Mayberry. I like his stuff. He wrote a series of short stories with like a werewolf detective that was really cool. So, looking forward to that. Winter's Tale by Mark Helprin. This is sort of like a fantasy, like magical realism thing set in New York City, I believe. They made a movie out of it recently that I heard wasn't very good, but it just sounds really cool. I like that kind of like I like fantasy novels that kind of use sort of famous cities as like a character in and of themselves. And I've read a lot about this book, and they say that it's like a really poetic and like moving kind of depiction of like New York in winter and that kind of thing, Winter's Tale. So that sounds cool. I would like to read that. It's a chunkster too. It's like almost 700 pages. So Kitty in the Midnight Hour. I think I just bought this just because I've been trying to get into more like urban fantasy kind of stuff. I try to read as widely as possible. I don't like making broad judgments about genres or marketing demographics or whatever. And I've read a few things sort of in the same vein before. I read some Patricia Briggs stuff and I liked it, so I don't know, we'll see. And it's got werewolves and shit, so. My first Haruki Murakami, I've got several. I think I've got several on the shelf actually, but this is his collection of short stories, The Elephant Vanishes. I haven't read this, but I know, I think the first story in here was later expanded into the Wind Up Bird Chronicle, which I think is also on the shelf, so you'll probably see that. Heroic Legend of Arslan 1, 2, and 3. My friend Nakia gave these to me because she's a big fan of it, but these were some duplicate copies that she had. It's like apparently based off of an old. It's the creator of Full Metal. Yeah, the creator of Full Metal Alchemist, and I think this is based off of an old Middle Eastern like heroic novel or whatever, which sounds cool. So, and these I'm really proud of. These are all of the Paperbacks from Hell reprints by Valancourt Books, who I've talked about before. They do reprints of sort of lost and forgotten horror novels. And this is part of a series that they did in collaboration with Grady Hendrix and Will Erickson, who I've been following for years and I really, really love. And they've been re-releasing these kind of... They've been re-releasing these kind of old classic paperbacks, like When Darkness Loves Us by Elizabeth Engstrom, which I have read and is really good. It's 2 novellas that are really, really disturbing and fucked up, but very beautiful. And let's see, The Pack by David Fisher, which is about it's like a killer dog thing. Nightblood by T. Chris Martindale, which is about like a Vietnam vet fighting vampires. And one thing that I love about a lot of these is that they have the original cover art too, which is awesome. The Tribe by Bari Wood, which I haven't read, but I've heard a lot of good things about. It's about a golem, and there's a lot of like sort of stuff about like Jewish identity and that kind of thing. I know Bari Wood was also the author of the book that was eventually turned into, it was the book Twins, which was turned into Dead Ringers, which is the Cronenberg movie. And another Elizabeth Engstrom book. I haven't read this one, Black Ambrosia, but this is I think this is a vampire novel. Or she's like a seductress, like a siren or whatever. But I love that cover art. The Nest by Gregory A. Douglas. This is like a killer. What are these? Killer ticks or? Oh, it says on the back here, giant mutant cockroaches. So yeah, it's part of that whole series of like 70s like when animals attack, novels. I've heard a lot of good things about it. It's supposed to be like really like pulpy and like crazy. So I enjoy that kind of stuff. Kind of like James Herbert's The Rats, which is a fun one. The Reaping by Bernard Taylor. Don't know much about this, but I've heard about Bernard Taylor before. I think he also wrote Goodnight Sweetheart, which is supposed to be like a really good like ghost story. The Spirit by Thomas Page, which I think is about... I think it's a Sasquatch book, actually. I'm not sure. Maybe it's just a ghost story. I don't know, but... And then, Let's Go Play at the Adams, which this was so fucking hard to get before they did this reprint. This was, Mendel W. Johnson. It was inspired by the Sylvia Likens case, which was also the inspiration for Jack Ketchum's The Girl Next Door, which is one of my favorite books ever. But this is kind of an antecedent to that. And I've always been wanting to read it, but secondhand copies were, like, stupid expensive, so I'm really happy that they republished this. So those are really cool. I'd recommend those. I'll put a link in the description. Some more classic sci-fi. The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert A. Heinlein. Never read it, heard a lot of good things about it. A queer classic, Our Lady of the Flowers by Jean Genet. I know a little bit about Jean Genet. I know he was like a Frenchman. He was kind of in and out of prisons. I think he wrote this in prison, actually. And he was sort of controversial at the time because the stuff he wrote was very transgressive and very queer. And so yeah, I've always been meaning to read that. Another classic, To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. Another one I've heard a lot about. I know it's famous for its kind of stream of consciousness style. Oh, this one's annotated. I know it's famous for its stream of consciousness style and everything, and so, I don't know. I try to read as much as I can. Oh, I guess you'd call this, yeah, a modern classic. Portnoy's Complaint by Philip Roth. I know Philip Roth died recently, rest in peace. But he's another sort of classic, modern classic writer that I've been meaning to get into, and this is kind of his first major success, mostly because from what I understand there's like tons of like masturbation and like sex and stuff in this book. It was a big controversy when it was published originally, and aside from it just being kind of considered a literary classic, I like books that are, I mean, if you haven't figured out already, I like books that are like transgressive or that were controversial or were banned, you know. So Ramsey Campbell, I've got a few of him. I've read a few of his books. He's kind of hit or miss for me, but when he's good, he's really good. Don't know much about this one. I just found it at Half Price Books and got it because I like the cover. It looked really cool. So, some more C.J. Cherryh. My friend Andy recommended this to me, the Fated Sun trilogy. I don't know much about it, but one of the things that Andy told me about in reference to this book and to a lot of her books is that she's really good at depicting kind of alien societies, which is really cool. Like truly alien societies, you know, not just like they're people, but a little bit different. Like she actually makes them feel unique and foreign and different, which is cool. I like that. And then Armies of the Night by Norman Mailer, which was his, History is a Novel. The novel is history. I believe this was his... Oh, I think this was about one of the presidential elections, I believe. I know he wrote another one. What was that called? I can't remember, but I know he wrote another book that was kind of like this that was about the moon landing, and I think I have a copy of that somewhere. I'm not sure, but I wanted to get into that, so... Oh, there's your... This is Aaron's, your pocket operator. How does this work?
Hit the second button from the right up. Play. They're listed. Maybe the battery. Oh, the battery's out. Oh no. No. One of my many beats.
You've got a few of those, don't you?
I'll do a simp video if someone wants it.
Okay. Oh boy. The big one. I think every, like, fucking literary snob like me probably has a copy of this. How many of them have actually read it? I haven't read it, I'll tell you right now. But Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. It's a modern classic. I've been wanting to read it for years and years and years. I've been really intimidated by it, but hopefully I can actually get to it one of these days. I mean, look at this. There's pages of footnotes. Look at this. How do you make sense of it? So, I don't know. I will get to it at some point. I've got a book here about the history of the OSS, because for a while I was really interested in, well, I still am, but I had like a big spy fiction phase. I was reading a lot of John le Carre and stuff, and so I was kind of interested in like what the actual history of, you know, espionage was, and I looked it up, and people say this book is pretty good, so, yeah, I don't know. Here we go. Yeah, Wind Up Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami. Again, I don't know much about him. I know he's he's a Japanese modernist, kind of surrealist, fantasist. You know, I've read a little bit of his stuff and I like it, but I haven't read any of his novels. But so that's another one I will get to at some point. Here's one that I have read that I really, really enjoyed. Nothing to Envy by Barbara Demick. Ordinary Lives in North Korea. It's exactly as the title says. It's a depiction of, I think it's 6 different people and like families' experience in North Korea, and she goes into a super like amount of detail about kind of their daily lives, what it's like to live under the Kim regime, the Juche regime, I guess you'd say. She talks about how difficult it is to for people to escape the country. She goes into detail about all that. It's a really fascinating read, and it won the it was a National Book Award finalist. So I would recommend that. It's really, really good.
You can pass that to me. That's my bookmark.
Yeah. This is Aaron's bookmark.
I
Actually,
was
he
in the
was
middle of
reading
reading
it.
that.
Well, what did you think of what you read?
I was enjoying it actually.
X Heroes by Peter Clines. This just sounded fucking weird. It's a superhero novel set in a zombie apocalypse. So I've been trying to find more superhero novels because I'm just curious, because superhero comics are a very visual medium. You know, you've got the comics, which are very visual. You've got movies and TV shows, animated series. So I was curious, how do you translate that into literature? So I have a few superhero novels like this that I bought, but this one just sounds crazy, and I like that cover art too. This is that MI5 book I was talking about. This is a big one. Yeah, The Defense of the Realm by Christopher Andrew. The authorized history of MI5. So I guess this is with the approval of the government. But yeah, again, like I said, I've read a lot of John le Carré and stuff, and I find the whole world of espionage really, really interesting. So I wanted to read that. These were this was a local author. I haven't read these, but this is a local author that I bought these from when I went to it was like a Scottish Highland Games fair kind of thing, and she was selling a bunch of her books. So I thought I'd support a local author. It's like urban fantasy, fairy tale-esque type of stuff. So who knows? I don't know if they're any good or not, but like I said, I like supporting local authors. This is a weird one. Lives of the Monster Dogs by Kirsten Bacchus. I haven't read it, but I was sold based on the concept. So, I mean, the cover kind of tells you everything you need to know. It's a group of super intelligent dogs who have built these kind of mechanical sort of humanoid bodies for themselves, and they end up in New York, I believe. Yeah, they come to New York from an isolated town in the Canadian wilderness, and they've got top hats and tails. They're gentlemen, but they're dogs. They're super intelligent dogs. And I love bizarre shit like that, so yeah, I wanted to read that.
I'm just pointing out, I don't know if it's picking up on the mic.
Oh yeah.
Other Lumps decided he's going to start eating in the middle of the review.
Are you starving, huh? Yeah, look at him. He's clearly starving.
I'm only addressing it in case the mic picks up the cat eating.
Art Sex Music. You've read this, actually, haven't you?
Yeah.
By Cozy Fanny Tootie. She's one of the members of Throbbing Gristle. She also had her own solo career with her husband. Well, they're not husband and wife.
I think they're common law.
Yeah, but her partner, Chris Carter, as Chris and Cozy. And this is her autobiography, which was released a couple years ago and was very well received. And you actually read it and you liked it, right?
Yeah, I will admit, it's one of the few books I've read cover to cover in a very short span.
Yeah, but you like autobiographies and
I do.
stuff, don't you? And I think you said they're making a movie of this or something?
I might be wrong.
Or a
I read
miniseries
somewhere
or
they might be
something?
making a movie or a miniseries around it.
That would be interesting. But you've told me, because we're both big fans of electronic music, Throbbing Gristle and that kind of stuff. And you told me it really goes into detail with kind of her experiences with the band and stuff, and her life and her kids and all that stuff. So that sounds cool. A couple Jeff Ryman things here. He's a queer sort of speculative fiction, sci-fi, fantasy author that I really like. I haven't read these, but I've read Was and Lust, which are both really, really good. I loved them, so I look forward to getting to these eventually. Some more Charles Bukowski. I already talked about this, Ham on Rye. This is his semi-autobiographical novel about his life growing up. And you've read this too, actually, haven't you?
Yeah, I've read most of the Bukowski books.
And yeah, he didn't have a happy childhood. One thing I remember from this is I think it was in the beginning of the book where, and you probably remember, where his father pulls over to the side of the road and he starts stealing oranges. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, and the farmer.
And the farmer comes out.
Shotgun.
Yeah. So it's pretty fucked up. And then this one, which is part of that kind of all of his novels are kind of semi-connected. So this is Factotum, which this is actually the movie tie-in edition. But this is about his experiences as a young man, kind of going from job to job, sort of just wandering. It's been a while since I've read these, but I really enjoyed them. I've also got his collection of short stories here, South of No North. The one that I remember from here, what was it called? I can't remember, but it was a story in here about this woman who marries this cannibal from some far off island, and it talks about how he's got a huge dick and stuff, and it's implied at the end of the story that he eats her. It's really weird and fucked up. That's the main one I remember from that. Let's see. Making of the Atomic Bomb by Richard Rhodes. Again, this is part of, my interest in, American history and stuff, and this is literally, it's about the making of the atomic bomb. Yeah, it won the Pulitzer Prize, National Book Award. I've heard a lot of good things about it, and the whole kind of history of the atomic bomb is something that I've always been interested in. I believe in this one they talk about, what was the thing that the scientist grabbed it and he like died, like what was that thing called? It was like the devil's...
The Demon Core.
The Demon Core. I think they talk about that in this book. So, Merlin of the Crystal Cave. It's part of a series. I think this is the first in a series about like Merlin, and I've always been interested in Arthurian legend and stuff. I have a copy of The Once and Future King somewhere over there, so why not? I have The Dumb House by John Burnside. This is recommended by Jen Lyons, or what's her name? No, Jen Campbell on BookTube. It's supposed to be like really disturbing. It's about a guy who's like he's like studies human language, and he kind of like manipulates his kids in order to like kind of to sort of discover his findings and that kind of stuff, and it just sounds really crazy and fucked up. Similarly, this was also recommended by Jen Campbell. Poor Things by Alasdair Gray. This is sort of a postmodern revision of Frankenstein that replaces the traditional monster with Bella Baxter. So it's about like a young woman who's brought back to life and kind of how she's like manipulated by her creator and that kind of thing. Sounds interesting. I like disturbing shit, so I'll get these out of the way first. Ugh. A lot of these I've already talked about because they were in my vlog, but I bought some more stuff recently, including California Gothic by Dennis Etchison. I've heard a lot about Dennis Etchison. I don't know a lot about this book specifically, but it's part of the Dell Abyss horror line, which I'm trying to collect all of them. So I found this in a used bookstore, and it's really nice quality. So similarly, Sharp's Rifles by Bernard Cornwell. This was the first book in the Sharp series, which I've heard a lot about, never read. So I found this in a used bookstore, so I was like, why not? It was like $6. So okay, oh yeah, Kindred by Octavia Butler. I've read a lot about this. I've heard a lot about Octavia Butler. I've never read her before, but I really want to. And what was it? Moyd from Media Death Cult did a review on this a few months ago, and it sounded really, really interesting. It's about a black woman in modern day, at least modern at the time the book was written, who gets teleported back in time to 1800s, slave days, and kind of just the juxtaposition of, the modern and the past and sort of the people she runs into and that kind of thing. The Complete Stories by Flannery O'Connor, a classic Southern Gothic writer I've always meant to read. I bought this, I think I found this at a thrift store for like $2, and it's like really nice quality, and it's like really pretty, so I had to have it, of course. Sacred Games by Vikram Chandra. I ran across this recently at a used bookstore. It's like this big Indian crime epic that takes place in Mumbai with like a Sikh police officer, and it's a fucking massive beast of a book. It's like it's a little over 900 pages, so who knows when I'll get to that, but it sounds really, really cool. And now we'll do the rest of this shelf. So I've got the first book in the Deathgate cycle, which I've heard a lot of good things about. This is by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, who are more known for their Dragonlance novels, which I've also heard a lot about but haven't read. So, House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende. It's supposed to be a classic, won a bunch of awards, heard a lot about it, magical realism type stuff. I believe she's Colombian, so I don't know. I like reading all kinds of stuff, as I've said. I've got Hyperion and the Fall of Hyperion here by Dan Simmons. Again, heard a lot of classic stuff about it. This won the Hugo, based off of the Canterbury Tales. So, and I've heard it's like really, really good. There's like some really fucked up dark shit in these, which I'm interested to get to. So, Roger Zelazny, Road Marks. It's like a collection of short stories. I think I got this mostly just because I liked the cover art. I've got 2 Joe R. Lansdales here. He's like a really sort of dark, savage, sort of crime horror author from Texas. Most people might know him for the Hap and Leonard series, which was turned into a TV series. These are, this was his first, one of his first novels, I think. It's like sort of a crime thriller. It's supposed to be like really dark and disturbing. And this is just a novel of suspense. This was actually also turned into a movie recently that I haven't seen, but I've heard is pretty good. But yeah, this is also his stuff's supposed to be very like dark and savage and nihilistic, and I like that sort of stuff. I've read a few of his books. I've read the first Hap and Leonard book, and I've read some of his short stories. I like his stuff. A lot of these are just random horror novels that I got because they have werewolves in them, like this one, Wolf Song by Tracy Briery. I'm sure it probably sucks. It's a Zebra horror paperback, and they were known for putting out a lot of shit, but we'll see. Mark of the Werewolf by Jeffrey Sackett. I think I heard about this on that horror blog that I read, run by Will Erickson, Too Much Horror Fiction. Yeah, he also wrote Blood of the Impaler, which is like a vampire novel, so he kind of, I guess, tackled both both classic monsters. But they're supposed to be very, like, kind of, sort of very classic in style, very old-fashioned. Could be interesting. Another random werewolf one. This is more of a romance novel, Full Moon Dreams. Look, if it's got a werewolf on it, I'm going to buy it, okay? Similarly, Christine Feehan, Lair of the Lion. I said I try not to judge based on genre. I want to give paranormal romance a chance, especially if it involves shapeshifters. This has, like, a guy who turns into a lion, so I don't know. We'll see. One of my favorite books, The Lost by Jack Ketchum. This was made into a movie, actually. Takes place in the late 60s. It's about a teenage serial killer named Ray Pye and kind of the people that he runs into and the effect that he has on kind of the people around him. And it slowly builds tension until it just explodes. It's a great book. It talks all about like the death of innocence in the 60s, and there's lots of like savage violence and horrific stuff. It's a great book. One of my favorites. Another Del Abyss horror novel, Shadow Twin. I don't know anything about it, but I mean, look at that cover art. Isn't that awesome? All of the Abyss horror books had really great cover art, which is primarily one of the reasons I wanted them. Oh, some Douglas Adams, Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency. I've read most of the Hitchhiker's Guide stuff, but I've never read these. Heard a lot about them. Excited to get to those eventually. Thomas M. Dish. This is like a horror novel that he wrote. Most people might know Thomas M. Dish because he was a sci-fi writer, and he also actually wrote a novella that was the basis for The Brave Little Toaster. Not a lot of people know that, but yeah. I didn't know he wrote horror, and it sounded interesting, so. Some more Fred Saberhagen. This is his book, The Frankenstein Papers, which is sort of like, I guess you call it, yeah, At Last, the Monster Speaks. It's like kind of, the true story of Frankenstein's monster and like what happened to him, and it's told from the monster's perspective, and I always love stuff like that. Anything involving Frankenstein is awesome, so. Another old horror paperback, The Burning by Jane Chambers. I also heard about this on Too Much Horror Fiction. I'm actually surprised that Valancourt hasn't put this out. It's a lesbian love story that involves like time travel and like astral projection and stuff like that. And it's like really dark and like moody and romantic. And considering I think it was published in the 70s, right? Yeah, 1978. So like a lesbian romance horror novel from the 70s. I mean, that sounds awesome. So, and that cover art's sick. Of course, Game of Thrones. I mean, what fantasy fan wouldn't have Game of Thrones? I haven't read it. I would like to at some point. We'll see. Helter Skelter, classic true crime, all about, the Manson murders. I wanted to learn more about the Manson murders. I've read a little bit here and there. I mean, they talk about it in The Lost, as I mentioned, and everything. So, and again, this is like sort of a... I wouldn't say this is the first true crime book. I guess you would say In Cold Blood would be that, but this is kind of the one that made it popular, or, kind of codified it, I guess you'd say. So I've always been meaning to read it. And I just enjoy stories about, like, late 60s Hollywood and that kind of thing. These are some of those in that Book of Swords series by Fred Saberhagen. Again, fantasy series about magic swords. I'm all over that. Another old horror paperback. Are you seeing a theme here? I have a lot of old horror paperbacks. This is from Tor Horror. Look at that step back art. Isn't that awesome? I don't know much about this. Sins of the Flesh by Don Davis and Jay Davis. It just sounds really weird and fucked up, and I love that cover art. That's awesome. And there's a blurb here from John Ferris that says, makes flowers in the attic look like Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm. So we'll see what that's like. Going with the werewolf theme, this is an old collection of werewolf short stories. Again, don't know much about it. What's in here, actually? Oh, it's from the 90s. Brian Hodge, Peter Crowther. Okay, so yeah, I don't know. I like werewolves, and I like that cover art, so we'll see what that's like. Okay, and now we've got the back shelf here. Oh, in fact, I just mentioned Peter Crother. There's a book from him. I think my friend Andy gave this to me because I don't remember buying this. The Longest Single Note. A shape-shifting serial killer in a dead-of-night police station. Oh, it's a story collection. Okay. So that short story that was in that werewolf book might be in here. I'll have to look that up. Horrorween by Al Sarantonio. This is kind of part of his like loosely connected series of books about, what was it? Orangefield, which is sort of like this town where all this like Halloween-y shit happens. I read the first book and it was okay, but I wanted to read the other ones because anything that like is involving Halloween, like the movie Trick or Treat, I love that shit. So, Famine by Graham Masterton. Graham Masterton, obviously famous British horror paperback author. This is The World on the Brink of Ultimate Disaster. It's literally about like this apocalyptic famine that strikes the U.S. or well the world, I guess. But yeah, it sounded interesting, and I've read a little bit of Graham Masterton. I really like his style. He reminds me a lot of James Herbert in that he kind of like, it doesn't matter how like ridiculous his storylines are, like he just goes for it, and I love that. I already own a copy of this. This is a duplicate. But
right, in the box.
Yeah, Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. I actually bought a copy of this recently because they just made the TV show, and I was like, oh, I need to actually read the book, and I guess I already had a copy of it. But the other copy I have is nicer, so I'll put this in the sell box.
Walk of shame.
Yeah. This is the box of books that we sell back to half price. Suzanne Brockman, Born to Darkness. I just heard a friend of mine, my friend Andrea, recommended this. The writer, Andrea Stewart, who I talked about in one of my vlogs, she wrote The Bone Shard Daughter for Orbit, which you should all go buy. She recommended this to me because I was asking for like, I think I put it on Facebook. I was like romance novels that don't suck and that have like queer elements and stuff. And she says this has like multiple pairings and it's like really well written. So I trust her. She's a good writer. A classic that I need to read, Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. It was one of the first kind of modern novels about the black experience. Invisible Man, so named because that's how the main character feels. He feels invisible as a black man in America. Yeah, I'm invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. So, a classic novel. I've heard a lot of great things about it. I will read it eventually. Two Jane Lindskold books, just because these involve werewolves, of course. I've heard a lot about these, but my friend Laura sold them to me when she was saying, she was like, what's that series of lesbian werewolf novels? And I didn't realize she was talking about these, but when I figured it out, I was like, oh, well, I really want to read those now. So we'll see what those are. Actually, I think, was it these? Or what am I thinking? Oh, no, I'm thinking of Alice Borchardt. These are about, these are fantasy novels about people who can, like, see through the eyes of wolves and stuff. But that's another one I want to read. The Oldest Trick by Austin Habershaw. This is a bind-up of two books. Yeah, The Iron Ring and Iron and Blood. I was sold just based on the concept. It's about a guy who gets betrayed by his partner, and he's left for dead. Yeah, and his mysterious rescuer took it upon himself to affix Tivian with an iron ring that prevents the wearer from any evil doing. So how do you commit revenge when you're prevented from doing anything bad? I also wanted to buy this because Austin Habershaw, he published a story a couple years ago in an issue of Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction that I really, really liked, called The Masochist's Apprentice, I think it was called. I think there's a version of that available online, so if I can find that, I'll put that in the description. But read that. That was a good story. Kind of in a similar vein, K.J. Parker, Colors in the Steel. This is the first volume of his Fencer's trilogy. Similar kind of vibe, sort of, I don't know if anarchic is the word I would look for, but it's that kind of like, sort of not tongue-in-cheek either, sort of grimdark, I guess you'd say, where it's kind of like knowing and kind of like commenting on a lot of tropes of fantasy, and it's very kind of freewheeling and adventurous and stuff. I don't know much about it. I've just heard a lot about K.J. Parker. More Fred Saberhagen again. The Dracula tape. This is sort of his companion piece to the Frankenstein papers, where this is from the perspective of Dracula. Vlad Tepes with a Sony cassette player. So, yeah, should be interesting. Oh, Headhunter by Michael Slade. This is a sort of notorious crime novel in the 80s that was kind of in the vein of like Thomas Harris, like Red Dragon, that kind of thing, about a guy who like puts people's heads on pikes, I think. Again, Will Erickson wrote about this, and he gave it a very glowing review, and it's supposed to be like, yeah, really gruesome and fucked up, and that cover's really cool. So, well, I don't know, we'll see. The year's best horror stories. I have a bunch of these, but this is just the one that's on the shelf. I have a few of these. This is 21. A big chunk of these were edited by Carl Edward Wagner, who is himself a famous horror author. He wrote the Kane stories and stuff like that. But I've heard these are all pretty interesting, and I enjoy horror short stories. So, you know, and they all have pretty interesting cover art. So, these are all leisure horror paperbacks. Unfortunately, Leisure's not around anymore because they went bankrupt and they were really shitty. Apparently, they didn't pay their authors at the end of it. But it kind of sucks because they used to put out a lot of these like cheap horror paperbacks. They put out a lot of Jack Ketchum, Edward Lee, stuff like that. And so you can't really get that sort of stuff anymore. There's not really anybody publishing that kind of stuff. But over here I've got Jigsaw Man by Gord Rollo, City Infernal by Edward Lee, which I've heard a lot about. It's like his interpretation of hell. The Halloween Man by Douglas Clegg. And Soul Taker by Brian Smith. So another werewolf novel here, an old one. The Night Walker by Thomas Tessier. Again, Will Erickson talked about this on his blog, gave it a glowing review. It's not a traditional werewolf novel as you might think. There's no like monsters running around. It's more psychological about this guy, and he's sort of like convinced he's a werewolf, but you're not sure if it's in his head or not. It sounds really like dark and atmospheric. I've read some of Thomas Tessier's short stories and I liked them, so we'll see how that turns out. Another werewolf book. This is the Werewolves of London by Brian Stableford, and this is like this big epic alternate history story set in the 1870s about like a secret cabal of werewolves that are kind of like running things, and they get into like a battle with like fallen angels, I think. It just sounded weird and interesting, and again, it's about werewolves, and if it's about werewolves, I have to read it, so. And the last one on this part of the shelf is Killing Time. It's a Star Trek novel by Delavon Heiss. I bought this specifically because it's known for it was one of the first Star Trek novels, not the first, but one of the first. Oh, I guess in 1985. But this was I think there was an earlier draft of this that originally had like some severely like homoerotic elements between Kirk and Spock, and apparently some of those vibes still kind of survive in the final version. So I just thought that would be interesting to read. So, and I'm a Star Trek fan, so of course I am. All right, so I'm sitting down now because I'm dying, but we're on the last shelf here, so. We're almost done. The first thing here is the female. Oh, I've got the price tag on there still. This is the Female Man by Joanna Russ. This is part of the SF Masterworks series, which is these are put out by a British publisher. Yeah, Gallant's. And this is another series I've been meaning to collect all of. And also, this is just like a classic, example of feminist science fiction from the early '70s. One I've always been meaning to read. Yeah, it's I think it's 3 or 4 different women, but it's like alternate versions of the same woman in like different scenarios, kind of showing the different roles of women in society and like the future and all that kind of shit. So it's supposed to be good. It's supposed to be a classic. More leisure horror paperbacks here. Simon Clarke, This Rage of Echoes. John Skipp and Cody Goodfellow, Jake's Wake. The Freak Show by Brian Smith, and Messenger by Edward Lee. I haven't read any of these, but like I said, I have a lot of these leisure paperbacks because, again, it was some of the only ways you could get cheap horror paperbacks back in the day, especially of more kind of transgressive authors like Jack Ketchum and Edward Lee. So, some more C.J. Cherry, Down Below Station. She won the Hugo for this, and this is another old Daw Yellow Spine. Again, it's supposed to be a sci-fi classic, and I've always wanted to read some C.J. Cherry, so there's that. Zodiac by Robert Graysmith. Again, I'm a bit of a true crime fan. I collect a lot of true crime books. This is the movie tie-in, which I don't really like, but I just wanted to read the book, so it doesn't really matter. But yeah, so it's all about the Zodiac Killer. This book was the basis for the movie, which I really enjoyed, so I wanted to read the actual book and, kind of get more details on the story. So, The Time of Feasting by Mick Farren. I literally don't know anything about this. I think I just found this at Half Price Books because I was in the mood for like a vampire horror novel from the 90s because that whole like time period is like really, for some reason, that just really appeals to me. That kind of like era in the 90s when like vampires kind of went, punk, and you had like The World of Darkness, Vampire the Masquerade and all that stuff. I just enjoy that whole vibe. And this is about like a vampire rock star, I think. Or no, it's about a colony of vampires who live beneath New York City. It just sounds really weird and interesting, so Charlene Harris, Dead Until Dark. I believe this is the first Sookie Stackhouse novel, which is obviously turned into the show True Blood, which was a huge success. Again, I just wanted to get into more urban fantasy, paranormal romance, that kind of stuff. I don't like to judge things based on genre. I wanted to kind of see how I got on with it for myself, so I bought the first book. A classic, The Thief of Always by Clive Barker. His one and only children's novel. I've talked about this before. A very creepy fable about a boy who's like being kept captive in this mysterious house by this man named Mr. Hood. And this version is actually signed, I think. Yep. So of course I have to keep it. Very proud of that. Some more Octavia Butler, and I've got a fucking sticker on this one too. Some more Octavia Butler. This is Wild Seed, which I believe is the first book in another series. But I wanted to read this because it sounded really interesting. It's about it's essentially about like a black woman with, well, I don't know if she actually is a black woman or if she just looks like a black woman, but she's this superpowered creature who looks like a black woman, kind of like Icon, I guess. But it sounded really interesting to me because it's about like that juxtaposition of being sort of a marginalized race, but also having these like amazing powers. Like how does that affect you and that kind of thing. So I wanted to read that. Behold the Man by Michael Moorcock. This is a really short one. I just wanted to read this based on the concept. It's about a guy who goes back in time to visit Jesus, and he finds out that Jesus isn't who he thought he was, so he becomes Jesus based on sort of half-remembered things of, the Sermon on the Mount and stuff. So I enjoy sacrilegious stuff like that. So here I've got a bunch of Robin Hobb stuff. These are her first two trilogies. I know this is the first one, Assassin's Apprentice, Royal Assassin, and Assassin's Quest. Royal Assassin and Assassin's Quest. These are all part of her the farce, the Realm of the Elderlings, I believe they're called. And she's one of those like famous, fantasy authors I've always been meaning to read, and I'd never gotten around to it. So I have the books, and I will read them at some point. I've also got the Tawny Man here, Fool's Errand, Golden Fool, and Fool's Fate. And I've also got Ship of Magic over on another shelf, so I do want to get to those at some point. She's one of those authors I've heard a lot of good things about. Just another random fantasy novel I grabbed while I was at a Goodwill, The Summoner by Gail Z. Martin. It's about a necromancer, so that was basically all I needed to be convinced to buy it. Don't know much else about it. I've heard a little bit of Gail Z. Martin, but I don't know much about them, so I don't know. It's about a necromancer. What else do you need to know? Life of Pi by Yann Martel. I've seen the movie, and I loved the movie, but I heard a lot about the book, and I watched a video recently where a guy was talking about how much he loved the book, and he read a little bit from the opening, and I just really liked the writing style and stuff. Anything about like India, I find really fascinating. So why not? The Corpse Rat King by Lee Battersby. This is another random find at Half Price Books that I really honestly got just for the title and that cover art. I mean, that's awesome. And it's about, people being sent to the kingdom of the dead, and there's like armies of dead people and stuff. It sounds awesome. All right, here we are on the last shelf. So, I do have a copy of this. Son of the Endless Night by John Ferris. I ran across a hardcover copy of this at a used bookstore, and I couldn't remember if I owned a copy already or not, so I didn't buy it, and now I know that I do. This is a novel about demonic possession. Again, Will Erickson wrote about it on his blog, and he really loved it. And it's also sort of like a courtroom drama, which sounds really interesting. And that step back cover art is fucking awesome. Look at that. So yeah, it's like this big, huge. Yeah, it's like a 500-page book all about like demonic possession, kind of in the vein of The Exorcist. But why not? Blood Crazy by Simon Clark. This is another leisure horror paperback. This is another one that I got just because I really liked the concept. Saturday was a normal day. People went shopping, to the movies. Everything was just as it should be, but not for long. By Sunday, civilization was in ruins. Adults had become murderously insane. One by one, they became infected with a crazed, uncontrollable urge to slaughter the young, even their own children. Especially their own children. So I love like post-apocalyptic shit like that where people just go crazy and start killing each other. So I was down for that. Fever in the Blood. I actually don't even remember buying this. I bought a lot of these old horror paperbacks from a Facebook group where I would just buy everything in lots. So, but it's about a guy who, yeah, it's about a crazy serial killer apparently with a fever in the blood. So we'll see how that is. The Prey by Robert Arthur Smith, another old horror paperback. Ancient creatures from hell who rise again to haunt mankind. Love that cover art. Melanie is another leisure horror. Slain in the Spirit by Melanie Tem. I believe she died recently, unfortunately, but I haven't read any of her stuff, but I know a lot about her. She was a very well-respected horror author. She published a few novels through the Delibis horror paperback line, which I own. She wrote Prodigal, which is supposed to be really good. So, yeah, don't know much about this, but I like Melanie Tem, or at least I like what I've heard of her. So, one of my favorites, The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury. This is a collection of short stories that are all revolving around a wraparound story of this illustrated man full of tattoos that move and come to life on his body, and each tattoo is sort of meant to be representative of one of the stories in the book. There's tons of great stories in here. The Velt, Kaleidoscope, The Long Rain, The Concrete Mixer, Marionettes Inc., Zero Hour. A lot of really classic stories in here. I read this for the first time when I was in high school, and I first kind of discovered Ray Bradbury, and this was one of the things that set me on my love for the guy. Rest in peace, Ray. More short stories here. This is Neil Gaiman's Smoke and Mirrors. A lot of good ones in here, too. One of my favorites is actually the first one. Chivalry, which is all about, I believe it's Lancelot, who shows up at this old woman's house who's just recently bought the Holy Grail from a thrift store, or a charity shop, I guess you'd say. And he wants to get it from her so that he can complete his quest, but she refuses, and it's kind of about their back and forth. It's a great story, really funny, has that very British sense of humor that I love. We were talking about Vampire the Masquerade earlier. Here's one of the Clan novels, which I've been working my way on collecting. I need to track and find all the ones that I own and get them all together, but this is Malkavian, who's the Psycho Clan, Fishmouth, all that shit, But yeah, I don't know much about this series, but I just really love this universe. I love this whole kind of like late 90s, early 2000s vampire stuff, I'm all about that, so I hope to read that eventually. Stalking Darkness by Lynn Flewelling. This is book 2 in the Night Runner series. I've read the first one. I haven't read this one. I enjoyed the first one, and this is actually one of the first, not the first, but one of the earlier fantasy series to have gay protagonists, which I love. It's about Alec and Seragel, who are sort of two rogues, and their friendship that eventually turns into romance. And they're worth the price of admission. Like I had a lot of problems with the first book, but what really sold it for me was Alec and Saragel's relationship. They're just so much fun to read about. So if you like that sort of stuff, and if you want to read more fantasy with queer protagonists, gay male protagonists especially, I would recommend the first book. I haven't read the second one, but we'll see. More Joe R. Lansdale. I really hate these covers. I wish this was the 80s paperback, but this was the only one I could find. This is The Night Runners. I believe this wasn't his first novel, I don't think, but this is one of his first big horror novels that was published under his own name. And it's about these kids who are going around killing people, and they're being manipulated by this god of the razor and stuff like that. It's supposed to be really weird and fucked up, so I'm all about that. Oh, I had a bookmark in here. Oh, I think I was reading this a long time ago. But this is Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. This was also turned into a TV series in the 90s, I think. It's about an alternate London that exists, I think, underground. It's about a guy named Richard Mayhew who gets pulled into this, magical London. It's pretty good from what I remember, but it's been a while. So, Dubliners by James Joyce. It's a classic. I haven't actually read this whole thing, but my creative writing teacher one of my creative writing teachers recommended this to me. I've always wanted to get into more James Joyce, and I've read a few of the stories in here, and I really liked them. Kind of sort of about provincial life in Dublin, and lots of weird characters. There was one I remember, in this one short story I remember, what was it? An Encounter, which is about these young people who run into this creepy old man who's sort of a masochist, and he talks all about spanking and stuff. He's a fucking weirdo. Apparently James Joyce is a bit of a weirdo, though. I think he was into spanking himself, so... Another Bradbury classic, The Martian Chronicles. If you haven't read this, you should. It's classic 50s science fiction about, The Martian Chronicles. It's about, Martians and people's first interactions with the Martian people, and it's basically like a book of interconnected short stories because a lot of them were short stories originally. But there's so many good ones in here. There's There Will Come Soft Rains. That's a classic story. Yeah, Usher 2. Yeah, and The Moon Be Still As Bright. There's so many good ones in here, so I would highly recommend that. In fact, since we're on the subject of Bradbury, Fahrenheit 451 in the October Country. I haven't actually read Fahrenheit 451, but I will. I want to. But we all know the story to that one. And The October Country, which is another collection of short stories, which I actually just reread this, I think 2 years ago or a year and a half ago. It's fucking great. It's one of my favorites. They're all, well, The October Country, so they're all kind of morbid and gothic and spooky, and they're all so beautiful. A lot of great stories in here. The Next in Line, Skeleton, The Jar, The Emissary, The Small Assassin, The Crowd, Uncle Einar. Homecoming is one of my favorite stories in here. That one broke my fucking heart, especially the end. If you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. And then I've got Howling Mad by Peter David, another werewolf book. This one is from the 90s, and I think Peter David, is that the comic writer, Peter David? I think it is. He wrote a bunch of Incredible Hulk stories in the 90s. He had like a really long run on the Incredible Hulk, but this is sort of a reversal where instead of a man who becomes a wolf, it's a wolf who becomes a man. So, I don't know. We'll see. Oh, more Clive Barker. The Hellbound Heart. Of course, this was turned into Hellraiser. I've talked about this before. It's a great novella. If you can get your hands on it, you really should read it. His writing is beautiful. It's full of his typical stuff, sexuality, grotesque, violence, and sadomasochism. It's really weird and fucked up, and I love it. Another classic that I still haven't read, Lord of the Flies by William Golding. I'm sure you all know what this is about. You all read it in school, but yeah. I will read it at some point, I promise. I really should. And it's not that long. It's only about 200 pages, so... The Resurrectionist by Thomas F. Monteleone. I know a little bit about Thomas F. Monteleone. He was mostly an editor. I believe he edited the Borderlands series, the horror collection of horror stories, which I read the first Borderlands collection and I loved it. That was a great one. But I don't know much about this. I think my friend Andy gave this to me, so that's a cool cover. I mentioned this earlier. Lust by Jeff Ryman. This is a really, really good book. It's about a young gay scientist who, for some reason, discovers that he can bring his thoughts into reality, his desires into reality, and he basically uses it to embark on this kind of lustful adventure of all these like sexual encounters and stuff, and it gets really weird and fucked up and metaphysical at the end, and it was beautifully written and it was fascinating. I loved it. I would highly recommend it. A modern classic of the 80s that I have yet to read, White Noise by Don DeLillo. Again, I don't know much about it. I know it's part of the whole kind of postmodernism movement that was big in the 80s with, people like, Don DeLillo. I guess you would count Thomas Pynchon, people like that. Very detached, very cold, kind of sterile, some might say, but I've heard a lot of good things. He's supposed to be, a classic author, so... I don't have Underworld, but I do want to read that at some point as well. Another zebra horror paperback. I honestly got this one just for the cover. Blood Dreams by Jack McLean. I mean, look at that. Can you imagine being in a bookstore in the 80s and seeing that? Isn't that awesome? I would have loved that. I have no idea what it's about, but I was literally just sold based on the cover art. The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. More classic science fiction. I believe this is, on the planet Winter there is no gender. It's about an alien race called the Gathenians that become male or female during each mating cycle, and kind of the humans that interact with them and their struggles under kind of comprehending that. So yeah, obviously it talks a lot about gender, it talks a lot about sexuality. It's supposed to be a classic. I've actually just recently gotten into Le Guin. I read The Lathe of Heaven earlier last month, and I loved it. So I would like to get to this at some point. Found You by Mary San Giovanni. This is another leisure horror paperback that I bought, along with this one, Sparrow Rock by Nate Kenyon. I believe this is sort of like a zombie story, and this is like just some kind of serial killer thing. I don't know. I read The Hollower by Mary San Giovanni, and I didn't really get the hype. I think wasn't that nominated for the Bram Stoker Award, and I didn't really like it, but I don't know. We'll try this out, and we'll try that out at some point too. And then the last book here, I actually forgot I had a copy of this. Hangs a Man by Shirley Jackson. I believe this was her second novel. She's one of my favorite authors. She wrote some classic books. We Have Always Lived in the Castle, The Haunting of Hill House, The Bird's Nest, and I recently read her short story collection, The Lottery and Other Stories, and that was fantastic. I would recommend that heavily. But this is like, yeah, some gothic thing about a girl who gets like kind of seduced by some kind of, yeah, a shattering novel of a young girl led ever deeper into total terror. I don't know. I love Shirley Jackson, so I'm sure I'll like this. So that is one, well, two technically, of my shelves. I hope you found that interesting. I've got a lot more that we'll get to when I have the stamina for it. So yeah, I hope you found that interesting. And if you did, share, like, leave a comment, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.